I know we're
Okay, so
we're getting.
This is today's last panel, and we have oh, this is the blue thing, right? Okay, we have Christopher as the moderator for this panel, which is how to kickstart quantum technology assessments. And Christopher is my group leader at ITAS. He is the leader of the project that we are running. And I don't want to just delay more. The floor is yours. We have our panelists. We have our moderator.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So maybe I'm the leader of the project, but the brain, is him. Thank you also from my side on behalf of ITAS and also by Armin Grunwald, who very unfortunately could not join us today, the Institute's leader, for your participation and contributions to this workshop. Usually I'm always talking free, but I've made a few notes. So what we call QTA, Quantum Technology Assessment, I really learned a lot already today, things that will be very useful. So I don't want you to, so to say, squeeze you like lemons to get more out of you. I would like to prefer to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about your work or aspects of your work that might be of interest for all of us, and in particular also for our people working. We are here working on quantum technology assessment. And the only thing that I would like to ask you kindly, but if you have another idea, just follow your ideas, to have a little bit focus on how you approach and conceptualize the future. So we have heard of some of these things already before, and also, of course, in any kind of planning and thinking, one addresses the future. But many of us, I don't know if everyone in the rooms knows this, but we often talk about futures. So in the sense of how is it possible, like, for example, in scenario work that we just did before, or in any other ways, how do we address, so to say, this future-oriented aspect of our work? This does not mean that you cannot talk about ethical issues or whatever you find interesting, just as a suggestion. And I'm also not a fan of lengthy invitations of panelists who can much better say themselves who they are or present them in the way. So I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself as you wish, as long as you wish, when explaining your approaches. And different to what I said just before, Joakim, so Doug is not in such a hurry that so we can start, because this was the original idea. We can start with you, and so you have the floor. And my particular interest in your case is the completed and planned work on, of course, on Imaginaries around quantum tech, because this is something which I don't know to what extent you know. Armin Grunwald, Sheila Jasanoff, many others. We have often worked together in this context of what we called sound a little bit like an optical expert vision assessment, and then and the notion of Imaginaries is often also very much used, socio-technical Imaginaries, by our colleague Andreas Lösch, who is also an ITAS. So if you could simply perhaps introduce yourself as you like, and a little bit your approach to the topic.
Thanks, Christopher. So my name is Joakim Juhl, and I work at the TU Munich, where we have just started working on quantum computing. And we have 2 new PhD students who are also part of the online audience. At least they were earlier today, so I hope they are here as well now. Yes, I have worked with Sheila Jasanoff and no socio-technical Imaginaries. I have yet to apply the framework directly to quantum technology, but I think it could be valuable to play with the idea and to see what sort of discussions could be illuminated from this perspective. I think that what is really interesting at the moment is also who is carving out what kind of Imaginaries, so that in different contexts, we may not see the exact same kind of actors actually working with quantum technology and in many ways trying to figure out what to do with this new technology, and basically who is making what kind of moves and what might the implications be down the road for instance, whether we are talking about private industry who is, for instance, in the US, are moving big on certain development fronts in quantum, whereas in Europe, we are seeing, for instance, in Germany, we're seeing more governmental driven investment in quantum. And I'm not quite sure how the financial side of the Oxford initiative is set up. But I think that if we do a comparison between different nation states across the globe, we might see that quantum technology becomes yet another lens in terms of socio-technical imaginaries that are showing how different governments and different publics are imagining the future. So what kind of society is it that we want, and how is it that quantum fits within that, but also is used as a way to digest our, you can say, historical understandings of what we have been through, and in that way express both responsibilities for the future, but also certain visions about what we might want to happen and also what we might not want to happen. So what I have observed without having done all the thorough groundwork yet is that we do see quite different approaches across, you can say, the Atlantic Ocean. So in Germany, it seems that there is a government interest in having some stake in quantum technology, which I think is interesting, but also maps onto a particular way for Germany to both want to be, you can say, at the forefront of technology, but also doing this in a way where the state has, or the government has, something to say in the direction. If we look to the US, what seems to be happening is that it's some really big private companies like Google, IBM, Microsoft, etc., who are making huge investments in quantum. And the implications of this, and this of course we cannot know for sure yet, but might be that the terms for how the future might look in terms of quantum in society would be far more on the hands of private companies if that kind of approach succeeds and will take over. So I think what we have to recognize here is that quantum technology is in some ways both quite advanced, since we have moved a lot from the theory coming about in the 80s to now, but we're also seeing quantum being something that is pretty far away from actual wide implementations. So it's a little bit difficult to define what we have in terms of what is the technology and who are the stakeholders that might be directly affected now or down the road. Because we have to imagine what are the actual, you can say, what are the kind of practical applications that this might lead to. And we know relatively little at this moment, even though a lot of things are already happening. But what we do know is that we can see that the kind of infrastructure that backs the technology, that is, who has the resources, who has the information flows, who has the knowledge to build these new technologies and to figure out these kind of applications, they are likely to not only set out certain directions for the technology, but also to claim ownership and to figure out what are the conditions under which the rest might be able to contribute and use the technology down the road. So what I think might be even more interesting to look at in terms of socio-technical imaginaries is not so much the individual applications, but rather what sort of society do we want, and how might quantum technology contribute to this? So will we see a further centralization of resources and power to a few private corporations that are now already operating at a financial scale that is larger than most of the European countries? Do we want to see more of that? And that is very likely to happen because they already have the resources, and it's really difficult to match that kind of investment in quantum that they are doing. Or do we want to also figure out a way where the ways in which we get to know and use quantum will be more democratized, will be something that is more also in the hands of governments who has maybe not all the say, but at least a little bit more leverage in terms of claiming the territory and ensuring that not only those who are wealthy can use the technology for commercial ends, but also that those who may not have those resources could equally benefit from the technology. So this is, of course, a democratic question about how do we control such a thing so that on the one hand, we do want to see investments, we do want also private, you can say, investors to see this as something that is worth investing in. But at the same time, we also see a world where the difference between poor and rich is only getting larger as we speak. And in some ways, this will challenge the very social order that we have experience with. And we have to figure out what sort of society we want in the future, and also how quantum could play key parts in this. And that might be something that we need to figure out already now. So even though we don't know what both the good and the bad consequences of quantum might be down the road yet, we already have normative positions on what sort of society we would like to see. And that could lead to certain kind of legislative initiatives about how to ensure that responsibilities are placed so that those who may have the resources to move on the technology and to envision the technology and the futures have to do that in some kind of, you can say, more democratic way, so that others weigh in on these futures, but also ensure that some kind of legislative framework would be in place. So this does not just end up becoming the Wild West, as we in some ways have seen with social media, and to some extent also artificial intelligence, where we don't really have that much governmental control. But it has been something that in many ways has escalated in the private sector and the commercial sector to a far larger degree than we could somehow work in terms of regulating the technology. It has been very difficult to catch up. So these are sort of my initial perspectives. I didn't really prepare an in-depth, you can say, analysis based on socio-technical imaginaries, but I think we can sort of see how that different governments and different ways of living will read themselves into the technology, and I think we can use that as a resource for figuring out how to approach technology assessment.
Yes, thank you very much. This was already very helpful, and of course we also like to this kind of comparisons. I think very useful. I would have another question, but I will keep it for later, because because Doug has to leave us a little bit earlier before it starts. So I would probably prefer now to give him the floor, and I would, if you like to, I would like to ask you to say a little bit, and maybe this even fits quite nicely to what has been said before. So concerning your upcoming future work, OECD, on anticipatory governance or something. Is this perhaps something where you could share some insights concerning your methodological approaches and your ideas? And yeah, but also feel free to directly react to some of the points having been made by Joakim.
Well, like Joakim, I also haven't prepared but I have a lot of ideas. I'll say two things, I guess. One will be, officially I can't speak on what the OECD is doing yet, because I start in January, but I can tell you my thoughts about what I'll be doing in the OECD. But first, I'd just like to say a few words about the role of social scientists in this, the role that we can play in technology assessments, in terms of thinking about the futures of technology. One of the approaches, you asked about methods. This is about methods that I've used in the past on all sorts of technologies. I mobilize a theory called sociology of expectations. In sociology of expectations, there is this idea that expectations of the future become powerful when they become shared. And so you can start tracing how people think about the future at an individual level and a collective level, especially in areas where there's high uncertainty and there is no agreement what the future will be, to make some sense making of how different stakeholders are thinking and positioning the future, and also unpacking the norms and barriers within how they think about the future. And you can play with that in a number of ways. You can do that in terms of road mapping exercises. You can do it in building scenarios, then collectively probing those scenarios, saying, well, okay, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what do I agree with, what I don't agree with. Aha, I see you taking that position in that world, but you're taking that position, and having a discussion around that. How to make sense of the future, which is uncertain and known, by revealing what people expect. And there's the theory of, or concept, I'm not sure it's a theory, of sociology of expectations, is that expectations over time can crystallize into agendas and plans when people agree and start putting resources into those ideas in the future, and those agendas then shape actually what happens. And so they become forceful. And so bringing to light expectations is, and then sharing those and crystallizing those also means that as a social scientist, you have to be responsible yourself for the role you play, because you're facilitating things and perhaps directing. I just wanted to share that because that's a methodology I use quite a lot. I mean, I also work with socio-technical imaginaries. It's a different approach, of course, but this is more about bottom-up expectations. Now, and the idea there is that there's an endogenous future. There's a future in the present, and you can reveal that. Of course, it will change. It's amorphous. You can have methods to explore this. So I use that a lot. Now, I'm putting on my future hats at the OECD. There are big questions on how to govern new and emerging technologies, and quantum might be a topic that I will be working on in the next couple of years. It's not confirmed, but it might be. And one of the issues from the policy level is, well, okay, what really is going on? What really is an issue today? What should we invest in as science agencies around mostly Western countries? The OECD is mostly about global north, but not totally. What's a key thing for the OECD for the next 2 years is about technology governance. What role could the OECD play in structuring anticipatory governance around new emerging technologies? And of course, the question is, well, okay, if we take quantum, do we do technocentric kind of techno assessments? And well, okay, we have these technologies, how are they developing, where will they go? Or do we look at quantum technology, how it co-evolves with society over the next 10, 20 years? Do we look beyond quantum and say, well, let's look at a future, some different futures, and see, well, how would quantum fit in as well? So I think that linked with the second presentation, we touched upon that idea of quantum response. So what I wanted to say is that there is interest, it seems, in international forum to be engaging with quantum and quantum futures, but with particular lenses and governance. What could be intelligence about the future that could be made, scenarios or visions or whatever, and how can that be fed into policy? So that's what I'll be working on next year, hopefully about quantum. We'll see whether it actually works out. We can talk further.
Cool. Yes, thank you very much. So again, I would say, so because I see you're also keen to open for discussion, I will just move on. So last but really not least, to you, Luca. I have, to be honest, I have no specific question because I was really impressed by the breadth of your interest. But maybe you could perhaps, I don't know if you're familiar with this, what Anecdotes calls hermeneutic technology assessment. This is basically, as I interpret it, basically the idea to open TA far beyond for applied ethics and also far beyond what we often hear in RRI, and bringing in perspectives from a broad range of traditions of European thought, etc., and also the arts or something. And I just wondered, but you can comment on whatever you want now, as long as you talk a little bit about how you would approach this perhaps future perspective would be very helpful. Yeah. But I wondered if to some extent some of the things you are doing, how you're approaching could be interesting for this hermeneutic TA stuff that we are doing.
Okay, I will briefly introduce myself. So I'm Luca Possati, I'm from TU Delft. I'm working in, my background is more philosophical, so I worked in philosophy of technology and hermeneutics and philosophy of artificial intelligence and human-machine relations. And now I'm working more on the ethics of quantum technologies from different perspectives, and one is technology assessment, but I'm more focused on the ethics of quantum technology. So which kind of ethical issues quantum technologies can raise. So which kind, in concrete terms, which kind of marginalization and discriminations and epistemic injustice, for example, the development of quantum technologies involves, and so also which kind of social responsibilities, which kind of new forms of social responsibilities we need to think about when we think about the development of quantum technologies. And so my approach to technology assessment is not it's not based on a consequentialist approach, in the sense that maybe I'm not so focused on the study of scenarios and futures, but I'm more focused on the analysis of the actual of the current debate, how people what is the public discussions about quantum technologies, how quantum technologies are depicted also in, for example, scientific journalism, and which kind of ethical issues so we can identify in this kind of debate, which kind also of geopolitical issues we can find in this debate. For example, the fears about how quantum cryptography will change diplomacy, or power shifts introduced by quantum cryptography, quantum computing. So my work is more focused on how ethics will change in contact with quantum technology. So which kind of also from a design perspective, how should we develop our approach to design in quantum technologies, in the sense that how should we understand values in a quantum context? How should we understand ethics in a quantum context? Because of course, when we design quantum device, we need to cope with quantum features, with quantum aspects. So this is these are the objects of my research.
Okay, excellent. So I will try to make sure that we have also time for discussion in the end, and that we can hear from all of you quite a lot of things. But I would like to take up Joakim's question and pass it over, point and pass it over to you, Doug. Like from your perspective, and also what you're planning to do, what do you think, or do you think it makes sense to do what Joakim said, at first to look not too much at the individual applications, but what society do we want to live in? And do you imagine that beyond the academia in a narrow sense, there is a way of doing this?
I think so. You know, again, last December, and Joachim's colleagues, Sebastian Fottenhauer was there at the event. It was technology in and for society, this kind of thing. And there was a discussion about this. And in terms of how can international organizations think about the future of new technologies, and most of it was discussing values, and how do you anticipate on the future of values that are, what interesting discussion was, what are the values today and what would be the values in the future? You know, maybe we should be looking at futures of how values evolve, and then look at technologies through that lens. Because of course, just taking a random technology, geoengineering of clouds, with putting stuff into the clouds to make them more reflective, to cool the earth a little bit. This is geoengineering, stratospheric aerosol injection or something like this. Right now, people are very much against this, but in 10, 15 years, when we start seeing the effects of climate change even more, values may change, the risk-benefit analysis may change. Also, so this is something about how future conditions may change values, but of course we may intentionally want to be amplifying values. And so in an organization like the OECD, there are some shared values across those member states. Of course, OECD doesn't cover the world. But the question there could be, well, what kind of values do we want to be promoting in the next 10, 15 years? And how do we use that to interrogate technology policy and governance?
Very good. And if I may, I would also like to ask you, to what extent do you think that and the research where you focus on existing discourse, etc., is this also a question for you, where you look, so to say, at obstacles for certain societal visions of the future, or would this be a too normative an approach for you, so to say?
Well, I think that there are some problems in how to say, develop public discussion about values in technology, and especially in quantum technology, because first of all, there is a big problem about communications, about dissemination, and sometimes scientific dissemination makes quantum more obscure and less transparent. And so this is a big problem in the accessibility, and so in the developing a normative approach to quantum technology. So even if we say that let's implement values in this kind of technology, there is also a problem about what we mean by values, which kind of values, even if we agree on a list of values, which kind of interpretation should we do about these values.
Okay, thank you. Sorry? Okay.
No, I'm just agreeing. Inclusivity means a different thing in different contexts. For example, you can use this term as a value, and then in different country contexts, it means very different things. And so unpacking what these values are is very important. And in the kind of thing that I was talking about, it's key. Okay,
now I would like to play the ball back to you, Joakim. Was there something of interest in the points what the two colleagues made? And perhaps an additional aspect is, I often understand the work of national comparisons of Imaginary as something, as I think Doug also alluded to, is very much looking at, for good reason, I'm a political scientist, looking at power structures like states or big companies. But to what extent do you think that such focus on national, or say EU and yes, to what extent do we need in such a manner to look a little bit deeper? So look, because of course there are frictions within society, etc. And this is also a question that we have thought a lot about. I mean, I and also discussed with Zeki in the meantime, like, of course, what kind of, so to say, internal counter narratives or counter imaginaries have to be taken into account. So there is, of course, the US and EU and Chinese or whatever, but in particular in US, EU, there are also counter imaginaries which go in the opposite direction. And so this is kind of additional question. Perhaps if you like to reaction to the two colleagues, and then if you like to comment on the other point.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. Well, I think that in general, I think we are in agreement on almost any point, and I guess that where, of course, we could specify what we mean is more about in the interpretation of how we look at these things. So I completely agree with Doug that at this stage where the technology is not more material than it is, the hard part actually is to look at the kind of values and normativities that are already in place, and to figure out what to sort of like how to enable those in order to figure out what space in the future this technology would be fitting to have. And I think that of course values are changing, some of them quite rapidly, others not so much. So by looking in past experiences with other technologies, the experience is that we can normally actually see some of the same patterns being reproduced. That's not the same to say that we can necessarily predict what will happen, but usually cultural, you can say, cultural formations tend not to change overnight, although we do see certain aspects changing more rapidly. So that's something to be aware of. And I think that what we should necessarily avoid is, of course, to lock something in a contemporary narrative that will then end up being outdated, so not maneuverable. And the question is more how to ensure that the ways in which we engage with quantum will be something that is also able to maneuver according to future needs, desires, problems, etc. And I think going back to the previous panel session where we also talked about responsible research and innovation, I think one of the really good points about responsible research and innovation is the question about how do we build in reflexivity as something that we actually can act upon. So not only that we look upon what has happened, but also that we can actually maneuver according to how we learn from the process. So we have to keep certain things open-ended, as Andy Sterling would have said. So how do we do that? And that's of course not something we can just answer right now, but maybe it's one of those kind of meta values that we have to think carefully about, so that we don't end up with a settlement that is not attentive to how we democratically may change our position on certain points. So I think that's very important. And yes, I do think that values can be assessed at this point, both by looking at previous technologies, but also by looking at response patterns in democracies, because although, as you allude to, that we will see different imaginaries playing out like in competition with one another, that will always be the case. Dominant imaginaries tend then to take more presence and become more, you can say, more influential on actual policy decisions and actions. But what is really interesting is that what we see may only be the tip of the iceberg. So a lot of controversy, a lot of debate, and a lot of tensions may be hidden beneath that. And of course, we need to tap into that, because different regions might have quite different identities that they tie up with how they read a technology and how they read their own role in the future, or maybe even that they have no role in this kind of future. So I think it's very important to also unlock these kind of tensions, especially in the, I would say, the state that Europe and the EU is in right now, where we have to understand that it's a very heterogeneous space, and that quantum should, by all means, not become something that will create more distance and will politically take us more apart, but rather we may have to think about how different parts of Europe may tap into the technology in different ways. So I share your interest in this more granular view of the kind of, you can say, social-political dynamics that are playing out with more regional, you can say, identity makings also as a huge part of this space.
Thank you. I'm sorry for keep moving this, but so it was anyway my idea to now already open it at least once, or maybe for all. Let's see how the discussion developed to all of us, for two reasons, or three reasons. Now we have some comments that I will read in a second. Second, if you have a comment or a question to Doug, now is your chance, because he has to leave in a minute. And third, I might be wrong. So in particular, look at some of the colleagues here. I might be wrong, but maybe this was much too specialized on our side, because although I see a large diversity of people here, of our panelists here, maybe from a little bit another perspective, this might look all very similar. So maybe you have just comments, questions, or something.
We all agree.
Yeah, and they all agreed. That was the fourth reason to open the discussion. Yeah. Also, but I have here some comment on from Bamira, I'm sure we discuss governance more tomorrow afternoon, but one aspect to add, and you will not be there anymore. So to add, what you were saying is the tension between governance, often read as regulation, versus innovation. In other words, if we rely on existing bodies, how can we make sure they don't stifle innovation by falling into the trap of regulating too early? Do you have an answer to this?
Yeah, I do. In the sense, I can wear both hats, me now and me next month, because we are in agreement of governance being broader than regulation era. And so the OECD has been looking at neurotechnology and responsible codes of conduct, responsible governance there. balance between innovation and governance in the broadest sense. You have self-regulation, building reflexivity, and have questions of responsibility and underlying values. And so governance being broader than regulation. And yeah, you're right. The existing bodies and organizational structures can stifle innovation. So the question is really to look at how you open up that. How do you open it up, as Joakim mentioned, in the Andy Sterling way, but in this case about governance, how do you open it up? And so, so yeah, that's my short answer.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking now on the second, because I really always think if we are doing hybrid stuff, we always should find a good balance between those in the room and those in the socio-technical or virtual room. Looking at the world we want is absolutely worthwhile. However, I have a concern about the geopolitical implications of an idealistic point of view. I almost used the word idealistic before. Okay, some countries might not, probably will not have the same attitude to responsible innovation futures as others. Then, whilst what we would consider responsible countries limit certain investment in QTA, others won't, and that would lead to an imbalance in QT capabilities and could lead to increased geopolitical instability. Another would be biological weapons development or human genetic engineering. Any comments on that from the panel, but I think we should be very open also.
Yeah, we should. I'm just going to say, well, it depends how much you want to stick to your values. I mean, he's right. The JC, is it? He's right. Being responsible could delay development, slow down the pace of technology to do it better, to follow the values you want. But the question is, do you run with a competition and compromise your values, or do you put values up front? And so this is a political decision to make, or decision, and so there is no right or wrong answer. But I can see, if you look at the US, where they have technologies for democracy initiative, putting democracy up front, whether you believe how it will work out or not, they feel obliged to do that. You have the UK doing something similar. You have France doing technologies for future good, I think is the title of the program translated into English. And so you see these motivations to put values up front. And so, yeah, these are trade-offs. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, Mira just added something, but said we can discuss this tomorrow. So, in fact, I wanted to talk a little bit about the geopolitical aspects, but again, just because I don't want to gallop over it. So is there already now some totally other comment or question or something to the panelists? Maybe start.
I have a couple of questions. Thank you very much, first of all, for your interventions. On the comment about, let's say, arms races within conflict, I think it's important to take into account that some arms are not countered by exactly the same arm. So if a country is developing particularly sophisticated chemical weapons, we won't be able to counter those particularly sophisticated chemical weapons by getting our own chemical weapons. That's not how the deterrence works exactly there. It's not fire with fire. And then going to also, if I can just give a quick reaction to Nora's point. Unfair competition can also narrow the possibilities for innovation as much as regulation can. Unfair competition can give certain incentives for certain innovations within that context, while leading to less cooperation within the same context. So it is also a type of narrowing down of our possibilities within innovation in market. And going to the question, I have a question to Luca, which departs a little bit from the conversation in politics.
I just for you online, you can also, of course, say and talk, and you don't need only to use the chat, just as an explanation. But please go on.
The other question is, have you seen any ways in which quantum technologies have already changed the way we can interact with ethics? Something that is discernible right now?
This was to you, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a big question in the sense that so far it's quite hard to think about. I mean, this is my opinion. It's quite hard to think about ethics and quantum technologies. It's a big problem because there is, but I'm saying something very evident. There is a big epistemic fraction between our experience, our ordinary experience, our ordinary language, our values, which are based on our experience, and quantum technologies, quantum physics. Because of course, even if we translate basic concepts of quantum technology into ordinary language, we are doing something else. We are not. This is quite, from my point of view, it's quite problematic because, as I said, we formulate our values, we reflect on our values from our ordinary experience. So from our also physical experience, phenomenological experience, I would say. But this is not valid in the quantum context. And the problem is that, as I said before, when we design a quantum device, we have to cope with quantum. And so the problem is which kind of values we want to implement in this technology, in the functioning of this technology. For me, it's quite problematic. How should we think values and quantum technology, ethics and quantum technology? So it's an open question.
Okay, I'm sorry, those online who want to ask something, so I only see it if you send me in the chat that you want to talk, or otherwise write in the chat. I'm sorry. Okay.
The solution to go back to applications and not look at us at first, but to look at applications, what's possible, and then see how does it really fit to our societies, and give those applications some rules that are bound to our values. I mean, couldn't that be the solution, instead of looking at our values all the time and then being separated from all the applications? Because in the end, you have those applications and you can be pragmatic about it and say, is that application for good, and how could the rule be? And then I think also that regulation can be something very positive for the market, because the market players need some kind of rules so that they know what they can build and what they cannot build, and how the market will be developed. So for them, it's also some kind of security for investment, and for investments that are really costly. So we could talk to those and about the applications that they just do, and somehow try to, in an attempt to look backwards at it, try to put it together with our values.
Responded to that.
If you like.
So yeah, for sure. I mean, that's how you get your teeth into these issues. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Any kind of new market formation requires these infrastructures, let's say standards, regulations, rules of the game to be. But every business will tell you that's what they want, small, large, or whatever. And so, yeah, one of the things could be to explore application areas and flesh this out in a scenario setting, and then think, well, okay, let's look and play in this world. Do we like what we see? What are the pathways to get to the kind of things that we think are interesting? Who are we in the first place? Is no question. Yeah. But no, I agree. And the question then is deciding where to look, and having a good rationale of, I'm going to look at medical area, or I'm going to look at modeling in this area as a new business area, or something like this. But yeah, I agree. But then, you know, one of the questions that we have in our lab when we talk about these things is, when you move away from the core technology to the value chain or the sector or something like this, you realize that your technology is only one part of the bigger picture, and therefore you have to think, well, okay, do I take into consideration the co-evolution of many different technologies that will fit together, or do I isolate this particular thing? It's a choice, yeah. But still, it's one of the methodological issues that we have in our lab. Is, well, okay, what would a systemic or sectorial TA look like for quantum?
Okay, just to hand this back. So Akatech has, for instance, developed the organizational shell and explains you there are these kind of technologies and they fit somehow into the wider picture. So there's education will change with some kind of technology, and culture will change, and standards and regulations. So there's a lot of places where transformation happens with every kind of application, and they give you some kind of like places to look at.
Yeah. I mean, it was in the background of this, what we were talking about the Futures Forum, actually. That scenario was to do that and find areas where you could zoom in and look at specific issues, first around the foresight and then zoom in. I know the Government Accountability Office is doing TA, they did a TA on rapid vaccine development where they looked at different types of technologies and the transformation points that each technology would bring, and then zoom into those different areas. So there are different approaches. So there are things that are kind of painting a bleak picture. But the question is I think one of the big questions is what could a quantum TA be? And so this is one, isn't it? This is one way.
Okay, thank you. Just for maybe not all of them know them, it's Architects, the German Academy of Science and Engineering, and I find it quite fascinating because Joakim, you opened somehow our discussion, and now we are talking about the applications, and I would really like maybe in a minute come back to this question, how these kind of, I think back in the 2000s one would have said grand societal not challenges, put them into some kind of visions, and then after a while when you look closer at it, it only makes sense to look at certain applications and also not only on certain technologies. But Peter has a question before.
Probably in line with the direction
or comment.
Wondering the language used when you talk about Imaginaries is technology assessment, is assessment. You describe, you analyze what's happening, and you try to capture it in terms of Imaginaries. Is it now that maybe a question to Doc and then later Delft, is now that OECD wants to design Imaginaries, not just analyze it, say, okay, well, I have these kinds of visions in mind. Well, it can't be a word vision, of course, because it's already taken. We're going to put Imaginaries on the table because that's the way we want. If that's so, how can you do that? It's already an idea of what's a good Imaginary is.
Well, the idea is I don't know, actually, in a sense of whether that is the, designing Imaginaries might be the way forward. There is an open question. It also isn't decided what will be the next year's activity.
Sure, I don't know.
I'll be decided next week, actually. But there is a question whether the OECD could play a kind of convening function to bring all sorts of ideas of what the future could be together around quantum, and then look at that and explore that, and then what?
Yeah, but explore.
The other one is actually saying, okay, if we all agree that there are these kind of values, or ideas, or missions that we think are important, how do we design? And that would be a little bit more proactive, I'd say, in terms of the OECD would actually be the creator of new things, which might be possible, but I can't say.
Yeah, that's also.
So I'm going to have to start being ready to.
Thank you. Yeah, Joakim, maybe you want to comment on this from your perspective, because as I always understood, also your kind of research is not in a very traditional sense purely academic endeavor, or there is some strong political interest also behind it, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's always a question of how to not only position yourself but also academically and intellectually how you sort of balance the kind of your own normativity in what you do. So to the question, as I am not sure I picked up everything from the room, but of how we know what a good imaginary looks like. Was that part of the the
Oh,
question.
so everyone, please online should, if it's not good enough, send in chat, because it's really important in a hybrid meeting. So
yeah, so I picked most of it.
yeah.
It was just to be sure that I'm answering the actual question. So
the question was basically if OECD, but I guess you don't limit this to OECD. If there should also be, if some such actors would not perhaps design Imaginaries, and Peter invited you also to comment on this from your point of view.
Yeah. So I think that what I came to think about was that Imaginaries is coming from this sensibility of looking at normative formations around science and technology, but I think at the same time we can also turn it reflexively into talking about what is then a good imaginary, and who might be in a good position to digest what then becomes imaginary formations. And I think that is a question that goes into our own political imagination about how we want societies to operate. So I think that that informations of socio-technical imaginaries, I'm not sure that we will see the exact same processes be responsible for imaginaries to become dominant at all times and in all societies. So I guess that having certain key players being part of articulating narratives and imaginaries in the public space might be a very important aspect. So if OECD is doing that, that is of course something that will allude to a lot of responsibility on their part of what that means for the formation of socio-technical imaginaries. And I think at least my own part here is that socio-technical imaginaries are based on collectively held, you can say, positions, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what that collective entails. And I think this is where, if we believe in a democratic order, that we have something where we can normatively assess to what extent an imaginary is held by the wide population, or whether we see certain elitarian formations that then acquires this kind of strong voice in the public space to pave the way for certain futures.
I would personally also be I like the question very much, and I would like, if Luca, if you don't mind, I would also like to pass it to you with a certain different perspective included. So the point is, much of such imaginaries involve a lot of emotions, like fears or pride or whatever, like that comes to technology. So if you look at when you look at the discourses they're going on, do you think it is even possible and maybe morally acceptable, or from an ethical point of view, okay, to so to say engineer imaginaries? So one could, in particular, sometimes I feel a little bit when I talk with natural scientists and engineers, they already feel that much of what is rather modest kind of societal visions around it is already a lot of say unnecessary ideology and putting science and technology in certain directions, etc. Would you like to comment on this from whatever perspective you like?
Yeah, well, the question about the relationship between imaginations and technologies, it's huge, and also which kind of imaginaries we are talking about, and of course the relationship between imaginaries and emotions are very it's a big question. Concerning quantum, I would say that if the question is, can we design imaginaries about quantum, or what is the relationship between social imaginaries and quantum, I would say that, well, actually, there are several imaginaries about quantum, in the sense that we have several narratives. For example, just to give an example, there are lots of examples of disseminations, scientific dissemination about quantum, that connects quantum and, for example, Indian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, and So they connect quantum to a specific imaginary, so a specific kind of esotericism, a specific kind also visions about life and death and different kind of religious beliefs. And this is a way to design a specific imaginary about quantum. Even scientists do that, because there are lots of books from scientists, from physicists about quantum physics and religion and esotericism. And this is connected also a kind of will to keep quantum secret, we could say. So fear of opening up the field to some extent.
Oh, that's an interesting point. So I was really shocked. Just I really like Anecdotes, and I use it for shameless self-advertising of the journal Nanoethics, where we are really welcome to have publications also on quantum. And believe it or not, it's the only journal that I know of that has Anecdote as an acceptable article category. So I give you an anecdote, just one. It was in Heidelberg, and Heidelberg is really a science communication hub or capital, I think not only in Germany. And there was a discussion in a very respected thing, and on the table there was someone who is, in the point of view of the scientist and the science journalist trained in the field, was presenting total pseudoscience. He had some academic background, but in the opinion of the others, and it was really, they really almost shouted at each other. And with an audience of German Bildungsbürgertum, educated upper classes, like from Latin schools or whatever, who had no chance at all to, although they are educated people, but not necessarily or often not in science and technology. And there was, it was quite a frustrating experience to see that for someone like me working in science communication so long. And this is no critique of the event or something. It just means that the hope that we can, so to say, everyone who is thinking about quantum in this kind of way is hopelessly like maybe this guy, one of the guys who stormed the Capitol, also this guy with a buffalo hat, he also believed that he's fighting on the quantum. So it's not only just these people, or at least there are audiences who are highly educated and who, for example, have also political and cultural capital, who have great difficulties in distinguishing these two things. Therefore, I really like this point. Sorry for the long anecdote. So we have still, if I'm right, 7 minutes or, oh, sorry, we have another question. Very nice.
Yeah, I guess it's more, well, a bit of a asking.
Or comment.
Yeah, maybe a comment, but also in the question of asking for precision. Am I talking loud enough? Okay. So I'm a physicist, for those of you who weren't here this morning, so my daily life is struggling with quantum systems and trying to understand what they can and cannot do. And I'm not sure whether openness is quite the right word, because firstly, I think one thing that we're at right now, so actually I'm going to bring together a bunch of thoughts that I had through the whole discussion. So one thing I think we're at right now, all of the knowledge in quantum technology right now is in the hands of academics in public laboratories. At this moment in time, it may not be true in 6 months or in a year's time, but because all of the companies that are in quantum technologies now, they have just recruited people from academic research. And they've recruited them based on the quality of their publications in academic journals. So in some sense, all of quantum technology, I think it's probably the technology that is maybe the most open in that sense of any technology we have at this stage. Because it's all in academic journals. Most of us put it online for free, so there's not even a problem of going to the library. However, of course, there is a big barrier to entry. The barrier to entry that we have now is typically to do a 20 or 30-hour course on quantum mechanics. That's sort of the minimum barrier to understand what people are talking about. I'm not even sure that's enough, but let's say that's already a big barrier for most people. So I'm not sure if the word openness is necessarily the right word there. And also the opposite of, is it secretive to have this knowledge that requires a big buy-in, but is freely available? And on the other hand, I don't think it's very different from any other technical subject. When I hear people discussing economics, I don't understand anything. I see two people shouting at each other, both claim they have a lot of evidence for what they're saying, but they are saying opposite things. And often, and I think we're all used to that in politics, that people say. So
I heard in philosophy that sometimes happens too.
It's a real challenge, and so it's a real challenge of communication. And it's not even clear if the disagreements for me are to think the disagreements in public are necessarily bad. I mean, that's also part of openness, is to see when people don't agree.
Yes.
Of course, when one person is talking rubbish and the other person is a genius, and the public don't have enough, haven't had that buy-in to be able to tell who is who, that's a problem. But that's a problem we all have in most things, medicine, economics, and so on. Yeah, so I guess that's my suggestion for responses. Let's say.
So I really like this point, but we are running out of time almost. So it was really great, and I would say yes. The question, like. This is what I'm, of course, I know, Peter, you are not thinking like this, but this kind of engineering off from the top is also a kind of attempt to consensus building, which gets automatically extremely complicated if you put it on the geopolitical arena. And I really like this other point, and I would just suggest, without ruling it into the next day, but wouldn't this be a wonderful topic also for the afternoon tomorrow because as you describe it, we are, so to say, at the moment in an historical situation where within months or at least a few years, things can change dramatically. Yeah. And so this could be something which you could really emphasize. But I think there was one more question, and if this is okay, or wasn't there? So then, there's one on, yes, sorry. This is, see, I thought the question was here. I like this. Okay, let me see. Yeah. Okay, it's about the anecdote. The anecdote also touched on who takes the epistemological power, definition of power of what the technology A is or B can do. Another concern is not only with pseudoscientists' active misinformation, but with bodies such as Architect, Bitkom, etc., taking on QC and publishing on it for a wide audience, and thereby albeit attempting to make the technology more widely accessible, running the risk of false information by oversimplification of feeling the pressures to make statements on near-term applications in order to justify their existence. Joakim, you were addressed to comment on this if you like. So I see the point. So and often, very often, you can show that misinformation can be unfortunately tracked back to the universities themselves. I know this from other contexts, at least, because people working there in publications, I really like the colleagues, often simplify, and then the media simplify a little bit more, and in the end. But Joakim, you were asking, then I would say maybe let's round it up.
I can try. I can see we are running out of time. So I think it's a very good comment, and I think that the difference between information and misinformation is also something that I think may not be so easy to navigate in, because as we just alluded to, as I heard in the room, that we have a relatively small kind of group of specialists working in quantum. And if quantum works as many other technology fields, then even within that, there will be quite big differences between what sort of quantum people work with, what kind of math that people apply to make sense of what they do, etc. So we're talking with something that is highly, you can say, esoteric and based on expert hands. Nevertheless, the consequences are something that should be of wide interest. And the big question is how we somehow connect what a wide audience is capable of relating to with something that specialists can see. This might be where this could become more important to discuss. And this is extremely difficult because on the one hand, we cannot just say that people are not capable. People are very capable, but they do need to, we do need to somehow figure out what is the meaning making around the technology that then will become politically at least influential. And I think this is also what I read into the point, is that even misinformation can be extremely effective for the meaning making at a wide scale, especially because it has been made more accessible and relates to other, let's say, historical political experiences in the wide public. So I think this is a really difficult thing to solve, but it's also something to be very attentive of, and also how we academics are talking about a technology, so we are not making straw men that may be understood as such by peers, but might be put into the wrong meaning-making context by others.
Great, thank you. So I think this was also, it's a new topic, but we don't, a very interesting topic. So thank you very much for all the contributions, and in particular to the panelists, and yeah, thank you. And now I will switch over again to, you round up everything now, right? Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, bye.